Hello, my name is Mary Ann and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers. In keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking, we ask that all who participate confine their discussion to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the focus on their application in everyday life in recovery. This is the 8th session of the 7th cycle of the workshop that was presented on September 14th, 2024, where we continued the 4th step, completing the harms inventories. At our next session on September 28th, 2024, we will begin the 5th step. Please note that there will be no meeting next week, which is September 21st, 2024. If you would like to contribute to the 7th tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links. These links are unlisted and not public. I request that you not share them at the public level or post on any social media sites. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and take a brief meditation for yourself before you begin the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop is already in session. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further. I hope you enjoy the workshop. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it, and I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. We always start this meeting with that version of the Serenity Prayer, and then we jump into the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's how we learn how to work the steps and live a sober life. The Big Book is the book of instructions on how to work the 12 steps. And the 12 steps are the instructions on how to get rid of the things blocking us off from our higher power, how to get connected to God, and how to stay surrendered from alcohol making our lives unmanageable. However, we need to be aware there's a lot of misconceptions out there. Just reading the book without doing what it says is not useful. It's just reading. And we don't want to do that because you can't learn how to, for example, swim without jumping in the water. I heard another really great analogy of it at a meeting this morning where a speaker said she compares this to when you buy groceries. When you buy your groceries, you have to carry the groceries into your house in the bag. You can't expect to eat unless you go out and buy groceries. So that's kind of like the footwork of we can't expect to get sober unless we go out there and we do the work. And we have to practice, and that's how we learn. So when we get into the Big Book, the cover page states
that this is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. We don't get involved in the controversy as to whether it's recovered or recovering. We focus on what the book says, which is we have recovered from alcoholism. What that means is that the problem is removed. I don't have to make a choice whether I drink or not because I don't think about it. I automatically turn to God instead of alcohol if I'm upset. Alcohol is no longer an option to solve my problems. Selfishness and self centeredness are gone. I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful, and my old destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new and peaceful ones. And another definition of of recovered is in the 10th step promises, where it states that we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we had been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That's our experience. That's how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. Another definition of recovered is on page 27, which states that ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. That's at the beginning of the book. Now we're going to jump to the end of the book in the appendix, the spiritual experience, where it states that a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. And then the last part that we're going to look at right now is from the foreword of the first edition, which states that we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. It later goes on to say that the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement to become recovered. There's other things involved, such as being willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do, which is now where we look at the first thing that we have to understand is that the desire to stop drinking not being the only requirement. That's where that sense of self knowledge comes in. And one of the things that we have found out with our experience as alcoholics and with other alcoholics over the years, and is documented beautifully in the book, is that we're at the first step. And the first step shows that we are powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. So we admit this powerlessness. We admit that our lives are unmanageable. This is that self knowledge. I now know that I can't drink. Before I realized it was just, I didn't understand why I was doing what I was doing. Now I admit that I'm powerless over alcohol. I admit that my life is unmanageable. However, as our experience has shown, both in the big book, in the stories, as a real alcoholic, The only thing self-knowledge does is make me realize that I cannot take just one drink without being physically driven to take one drink after another. This then allows me the opportunity, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on the first drink. And I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power, which brings me to step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. The thing that's great about this is that I'm the one who chooses what that power is. And the only requirement for me to take this step is to ask myself the question, do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than me that can restore me to sanity? As long as I can say yes to that question, I can move on to the next step, which is the decision-making portion of the steps. Step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. I do not turn my will and my life over to the care of God yet. I only make a decision to do it. And therefore, the third step prayer is where I'm offering myself to God. I'm asking God basically if he will have me. Can I work for you? Is basically, it's kind of like filling out a job application if you really think about it. I'm offering to do some work. So I'm asking God if I can do his will. All that's needed here is faith. And if I can make that decision now, I've got some work to do. So that brings me to step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And we're in the middle of the 4th step right now. We have 4 4th step inventories. And our inventories are basically identifying our character defects that are getting in the way and blocking our relationship with God. So it comes down to looking at our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our personal relations were hurt or threatened. So we started with our resentments, but these carry over into all of our inventories. We did the resentment inventory, which is the first one, and that's the one, those resentments get us in a lot of trouble. And what we find out when we look at our resentments is that these parts of self get wounded. And the parts of self, again, are our self-esteem, our pocketbook, our emotional security, our ambitions, and our personal relationships and our sex relationships. And what it comes down to is we look at where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened. Although a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set those matters straight. And this is straight from page 67. And this boils down into 5 main character defects. I'm selfish, I'm dishonest, I'm self-seeking, I'm frightened, and I'm inconsiderate. And then we boil it down to a little bit further, because underneath all of these other character defects are these 5 main character defects rather are other character defects, like being an approval seeker, or being manipulative, or mean-spirited, or two-faced, or bossy, or argumentative. All of these things, they roll up. And this is important because the big book lists things like egotistical, indignant, self-pitying, self-centered, and self-delusional. And when we get to steps 6 and 7, the instructions include that we're ready to let God remove from us all of the things that we admitted are objectable. and every single defective character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. So while every character defect falls within the major five or a combination of them, it's better to be more specific. So, for example, people pleasing is really being dishonest, self seeking, and frightened all at the same time. But people pleasing gives a more accurate description of what I'm actually doing. The same situations will repeat themselves over and over and over again because we repeat what we don't repair. And then we continue to be unhappy and wonder, why me? Why does this always happen to me? And the reason it always happens to you is that your character defects come into play over and over again. So if we look at the person, so it's not the person listed on column 1, for example, of your resentment inventory, but it's the character defects that come into play. And those same concepts roll over into all of our inventory. So the next one that we looked at last week was the fear inventory. And the fear inventory basically addresses, we're only born with 2 fears, the fear of loud noises and the fear of falling. All other fears are learned. Either we're afraid we're not going to get something we think we deserve, or we're afraid we're going to lose something we already have. So the fear inventory looks at, what am I afraid of? Why am I afraid of it? Do I realize that I rely on myself instead of my higher power? And then columns 4 and 5 are the actual application, where I look for a solution and what character defects, again, are going to get in my way. So what are the things that I can do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? And what are the character defects that would keep me from doing what I need to do in column 4? So those character defects are going to get in my way. Then we're in the harms inventories, and there's 2 harms inventories. The harms that I have done just in everyday life, in my interactions with people, and then the harms that I've done as a result of my sexual conduct. So what we do is we go back over our conduct over the years. Where have we been selfish, dishonest, inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Where were we at fault, and what should we have done instead? And then for the sex inventory, it's the same thing, but then you also add to that, did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? And this is an example of a harms inventory to others, excluding sex, which had to do with an example of someone harming an institution, which was a department store. And what they did was they bought stolen merchandise. And the part of self that got satisfaction was the pocketbook, because they didn't have to pay as much, and their ambitions, because they got what they wanted. Column 4 talks about what should they have done differently, and what will they do in the future. So what they should have done differently was not buy stolen merchandise. And what they should do in the future is they should pay for things they want and not take things that don't belong to them. And then what character defects allowed them to purchase stolen property? Well, they were self-seeking, they were dishonest, and they were a thief. So when we get to the harms inventories, we start to see what new behaviors we need to be incorporating into our everyday life, which are the behaviors we list in column 4. So when we look at the harms inventory to others, excluding sex, what we do is we go down and we list everyone that we have hurt in that first column. The people, the businesses, anything and everyone in column 1. Keep it simple. Column 2 is all about you, and it doesn't matter what the other person did to cause this. It's only about the actions you took that hurt someone else. So make sure it's something like an action statement about you. I did something, I said something, I caused something. It doesn't matter if the person or the business knows you harmed them or not. As long as you know it, it goes on to your inventory. Now, when we get into the harms inventory, when we look at the parts of self, it's the opposite of the resentment inventory. In the resentment inventory, the parts of self got wounded. In the harms inventory, the parts of self got rewarded. It's like, hey, I got that one. So when we look at the form, we do the same. We have the same grid, which has to do with our self-esteem, our pocketbook, our emotional security, our ambitions, our personal relationships, and our sex relationships. We have the same grid there. We check it off the same way, but we have to remember those parts of self got rewarded, as opposed to in the resentment inventory, it got wounded. So when we look at this one, and this is the one in using sex conduct, the person wounded a coworker. And what they did was they dressed inappropriately, they acted inappropriately at work so that they would take them out and buy them lunch and buy them drinks. And what it did was it created really a dysfunctional work environment because it created frustration. Plus, there was lying and dishonesty with because they were both married. So, what this is looking at is it affected the pocketbook because they didn't have to pay money, and it also affected their ambitions. So, what would they have done differently? It would be to act professionally at work and pay their own way and not take advantage of people. What was going on in column 5 is they were selfish, they were a user, they were inconsiderate, and they were lustful. So that's an example of the harms caused to others using sex. So when we're using the sex inventory, again, it's the same thing. You list everyone you've hurt through sex or intimate relationships in column 1. In column 2, you list exactly what you did to the person, but remember, keep it simple and ask yourself if the actions listed in column 2 created jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness. Now, it doesn't matter if the person knows you harmed them or not. So, for example, if you were having an affair with a married person, their spouse's name would be in the first column as the person you hurt by having an affair with their spouse, which would be in column 2. Then we look at columns 3, 4, and 5. So remember, we check off the appropriate part of self that got satisfaction from that. And then in column 4, we list what we should have done. And in column 5, we list the character defects. And we'll note that the same character defects tend to come up over and over again. There is a funny story that has been going around the program for many years where a woman was working her steps, and they say not to get into a relationship for the first year. Well, she had gone for a year, and she went to her sponsor and told her that she wanted to start dating. Her sponsor told her that the answer to every question is in the big book, and to go to page 69 in the big book for advice on sex. But the woman was a little bit on the dyslexic side, and she went to page 96 instead. So basically, what happened when she went into page she went to page 96 instead, and this is what she read as her advice on sex. Do not be discouraged if your prospect does not respond at once. search out another alcoholic and try again. You're sure to find someone desperate enough to accept with eagerness what you have to offer. Now, if she had gone to page 69, what she would have found was, in this way, we try to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? We asked God to mold our ideal and help us to live up to them. We remembered always that our sex powers were God given and therefore good, neither to be used lightly or selfishness, nor to be despised or loathed. Keep in mind that we are not bad people trying to get good, but sick people who are trying to get well. We may have done some pretty awful things, and we've done nothing that we should be punishable for. And those things do not define who we really are. And we've, again, done nothing to be punished for. So when we get to steps 8 and 9, we're going to take the actions to correct those harms. So when you're working the steps, you end up with the same personality of who you are, no matter what. And once your character defects are removed, you no longer have the negative consequences that come about by the behaviors you had when you were at step 1, nor do you behave nor do you have inappropriate reactions to what's going on around you. And one of the things we tend to do, and I'll be talking about a lot more, is as alcoholics, we misinterpret and react inappropriately to things that are going on around us. So therefore, once we stop doing that, the result of all of it, all of your relationships are going to change. So the next instruction is on page 69, and it talks about becoming the ideal self. The big book says that whatever our ideal self turns out to be, we must be willing to grow towards it. We must be willing to make amends. Wait a minute, what's going on here? I just realized I wasn't sharing my screen. Why didn't you say something to me?
We're having supposed genetics on the side. These are just our avatars.
Sorry, Chris. Sorry,
I
Daniel.
didn't realize I wasn't sharing my screen. Okay. Okay, so the next instruction is on page 69 and talks about becoming the ideal self. And it states that whatever our ideal self turns out to be, we must be willing to grow towards it. We must be willing to make amends where we've done harm, provided we do not bring about still more harm by doing so. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problem. In meditation, we ask God what we should do about each specific matter, and the right answer will come. Now, well, this is where we're going to go to the workbook. And in the workbook, we're now on pages 140 and 141. 140 and 141. And this is where we have the ideal self worksheet. It takes up 2 pages. It's a little bit bigger than the screen. So now when we look at the ideal self worksheet, this is your homework. You have homework because we're getting ready to go from the 4th step to the 5th step. And we're going to be doing a couple of free 5th step activities. So the ideal self is basically what we want to do. Who do we want to be? So if you look at the ideal self, and you may need more than one copy of this, which again you can download from the Google Drive, because there is a folder that has additional forms. is you would put someone's name at the top. My relationship with my mother, my father, my coworker, my neighbor, my sponsor, whatever it is, that whoever, anybody you have in a relationship with, you want to do one of these for. And then you're going to have that relationship written there. Now, the first thing you're going to look at is, how have I been selfish in this relationship? And think about that relationship with that person. Think about that relationship with that person. How have you been selfish? Have you borrowed money and never paid it back? Have you used them to drive you around, maybe to go to give you rides to work, and not even offered to pay for gas? Just expected that they should drive you everywhere. So how have you been selfish with this person? Um, how have you been dishonest? Have you lied to them? What did you lie about? Did you steal anything from them? What did you steal? How have you been inconsiderate? And there's all different ways we can be considerate. Maybe we leave our stuff laying around and expect someone else to clean it up after us. That could be at home, that could be at work, that could be anywhere, but we're inconsiderate. How have I hurt them or anyone around them? What have I done? Have I talked about them? Have I gossiped? How did I hurt them? One of the common things that happens a lot is we character assassinate people. We make fun of people under the guise of humor, and we hurt people's feelings, and then we say, ha ha ha, can't you take a joke? But it's really not funny when it's humor at someone else's expense. How have I aroused jealousy? If I'm in a relationship with someone, do I flirt with other people? What are some of the things that I do that might arouse jealousy? How have I aroused suspicion? How have I aroused bitterness? Have I done things that really took advantage of people, really hurt them, and they felt bitter as a result? So, what are some of the things I need to do differently? In this relationship, I need to be honest with people. I need to apologize. These are things that I need to do because I've harmed these people. What characteristics do I want to have that would make me, not them, the ideal person in this relationship? What character assets would enable you to do things differently? Well, I'm a good listener. I am considerate. I clean up for after myself. If someone is paying my way and picking up my check at the diner all the time, once in a while I pick up the check for them. Little things like that. So if I had these character defects, how would I act when I'm with this person? So therefore, I would be kind and I would be considerate. I would be a good listener. I would listen to them. I would respect them. And this last part is the ideal that you want to work towards. This is how I should react in all my relationships. So you pick the relationships in your life. It's not just this one form. You're going to use the same form, but you're going to want to look at this with how many people do you have relationships with that this would apply. And then, all right. So once you do that, then you're ready to do what we call the pre-fifth step item. Pre-fifth step item. This is really a very powerful activity that we go through, because what we do before we do our fifth step, first off, we need all four of our four-step inventories in front of us. Everything we need for steps 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 is in the inventories. So if we start with the resentment inventory, the first thing we do is we read the resentment forward. So if we go down to the bottom here, we looked at all of these things. I'm mad at Mr. Brown because he pays a lot of attention to my wife. This affected my sex relationship, and I got the ball rolling by getting drunk after work and staying out all night. The character defects that allowed me to get drunk after work and stayed out all night was that I was selfish, frightened, inconsiderate, and jealous. So that's where I take all of my columns. I go first column 1, then I go to column 2, column 3, column 4, and column 5. It's all there. I just write it out as a statement. So I read it forward. This is what I get. Now, the next thing that I do is, now that I've read it forward, I'm going to take it and I'm going to reverse it. This was one of the most powerful experiences for me because I never realized this before, but I read it backward. So I reverse the form. I reverse it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So basically what I'm saying is, if I was not selfish, frightened, inconsiderate, and jealous, I would have come straight home from work, not gotten drunk and stayed out all night. Then my sex relations would not have been affected because Brown would not be paying attention to my wife. So it completely turns it around, where I see that I'm selfish, I'm frightened, I'm inconsiderate, I'm jealous. In other words, I'm a jerk. Okay. I did those things. And if I didn't do those things, I wouldn't have had that resentment. Really, really powerful. This was when I realized that a lot of the major decisions that I made in my life were sourced, the source of those decisions were in a character defect. And I never noticed it until I reversed that resentment. And that's a very, very powerful activity. And what you're basically doing is you're reading it backwards. In other words, if I was not a jerk, if I was not whatever, I wouldn't have done what I did, then the things that had happened wouldn't have happened, because I wouldn't have, I wouldn't have done it. It wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have done those things. Therefore those things wouldn't matter, or it just wouldn't happen. So it wouldn't matter that whatever happened in column 1 happened in column 2. I wouldn't care, because it wouldn't make a difference. So what we're looking at here is the facts. There's no blame, shame, or guilt associated with them. There's nothing good or bad, right or wrong. It's just the facts. And you take responsibility for getting the ball rolling for each resentment, and realize that it was your character defects that allowed you to do what you did. Now, if when you're reversing it, something doesn't make sense or doesn't seem to ring true, then either column 2 or column 4 is not right, and you need to look at it and figure out what's going on here. Well, I'm maybe my own delusion is still affecting my view of what I did, or my rationalization is still in there. But remember, when the remainder of the steps are done, any remaining resentment may go away in a very short period of time. So if after reversing the resentment, you're still upset with the person, what you want to do is put an X next to their name. And for the names that have an X next to them, you add these people to your morning prayers, saying something like, please God, give so-and-so a great job, health, a loving family, and great relationships. What you're asking God to do here is anything that you would want for yourself, you're asking God to give to them. And you will do an individual prayer for each person that has an X to their name, and continue doing it every day until the resentment goes away. And that will work. You pray for that person. Uh, and therefore, what's really important to understand here is that God's only going to do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. So I can pray for this person. I can't change that person, but I can pray for them. But God's only going to do for me what I cannot do for ourselves. So when we go to column 4 of the fear and harms inventories, we're looking at the things that we are capable of doing. These are our action plans. You know, when I teach people leadership development and goal achievement, we're always looking at what are the action plans that we have to do in order to meet this goal. So when I go to my fear inventory, for example, what's written here again is my action plan. This is the footwork that I'm going to start doing immediately and continue to do and so that the fears do not come true. Well, if I'm doing the footwork, I'm not going to have these fears. So what you want to do then is read what you wrote in column 4 of your fears inventory. Excuse me. You read what you wrote in column 4 of your harms inventory. What should I have done differently? And what will I do in the future? So this is telling me what I need to do. How am I doing that? I need to do. What this person needs to do is not buy stolen merchandise and pay for things that they want. So what should I have done differently? What will I do in the future? And you'll do this with both your harms inventories. Okay. So that finishes up step 4.
Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop, and if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's prayer for mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.